Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to this webinar. We would like to welcome you. Just a note of technical issues before we start. The session will be bilingual, English, French. You can choose the language interpretation you prefer by clicking your preferred language at the bottom left of the call screen. I'll just start with a short welcome message in French. Cette session sera bilingue, anglais-français. Vous pouvez choisir.
This session will be bilingual in English and in French. You could choose the language of your choice by clicking at the bottom left of your screen and choosing your language.
Table on the challenges and opportunities for scaling vaccine manufacturing in Africa and where research can help. My name is Dr. Montasser Kamal, and I'm the Director of the Global Health Program at Canada's International Development Research Centre. I have a short land acknowledgement in French. Je tiens à souligner que le siège social au CRDI.
I would like to acknowledge that the headquarters of the IDRC is located on the unceded territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And this land that we call today the Montreal.
Knowledge, the African Union has set an ambitious objective of developing, producing, and distributing at least 60% of vaccines for Africa by 2040, and has established the Partnerships for Africa Vaccine Manufacturing to enhance the continent's long-term supply resilience. At present, however, less than 0.1% of the world's vaccine supply is manufactured in Africa. This calls for actions by Africa itself, but also by friends and partners of Africa. Many of these friends and partners are here in our webinar today, including Global Affairs Canada, the Mastercard Foundation, and of course, IDRC. IDRC is funding research to identify challenges and issues associated with scaling vaccine manufacturing and distribution in Africa, and to accelerate the uptake and use of new vaccines as they are rolled out. A couple of words of introduction on IDRC in French. Depuis plus de 50 ans, le Centre de Recherche pour le...
For over 50 years now, the International Research Center for Development, the IDRC, supports and funds research and evaluation in the different regions of the world, and we want to enhance change at the global level. In this effort, the IDRC has organized a roundtable that will gather the experts from diverse disciplines so that they can exchange points of views and find solutions to support and accelerate the goals in Africa for the scaling of vaccines. Today's roundtable is the first of the series and is organized in collaboration with Global Affairs Canada.
Part of Canada's international assistance to improve vaccine equity in Africa, IDRC is funding equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines in Africa, led by the African Health Economics and Policy Association, in collaboration with Africa CDC and the UN Economic Commission for Africa. This collaboration will generate evidence to inform Africa's agenda for COVID-19 vaccine production, equitable distribution, delivery, and uptake, in particular focusing on legislative trade and policy barriers on production and manufacturing on the continent. IDRC is also funding the Open Africa Innovation Research Network, OpenAIR, to study the underlying regulatory causes of global vaccine inequity and identify research-based strategies to avoid similar problems in the future, either in the context of the next global pandemic, the deployment of similar technologies to combat other health crises, such as vaccines for malaria and cancer, or in the context of regulation for innovation to solve other global development challenges. The objectives of today are specific, of today's webinar are specific. This webinar roundtable the purpose is to discuss the challenges and opportunities of scaling up vaccine research and development, manufacturing, distribution, and uptake in Africa. The roundtables will, the series and this today and the series I mentioned will identify the current state of play and highlight existing capacities in R&D, manufacturing, distribution, and communication. To kick off the session, we will have a keynote address followed by a presentation to set the scene for the panel discussion. After the panel session, we will then invite questions and comments from participants via the chat function of the Kudo platform. A warm welcome to our speakers, panelists, and all of you joining us from across the world. First, let me introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Ahmed Ogwell is the Acting Deputy Director General of Africa CDC. He's also the Founding Deputy Director, and in these roles, he has led the strategic work and oversight of Africa CDC. He works closely with African Union member states and partners to deliver on the mandate of Africa CDC of preventing and controlling diseases in Africa. Dr. Ahmed has led the operations of Africa CDC during COVID-19 pandemic, coordinating the planning, acquisition, and delivery of life-saving health products to African countries. Formerly, he worked with the World Health Organization at both the headquarters and regional office of Africa in combating non-communicable diseases and tobacco control. Prior to that, Dr. Ahmed worked at country level in the Ministry of Health, Kenya, as Director of Non-Communicable Diseases and then Head of the Office for International Health Relations. He has over 25 years of experience in public health and is an alumnus of the University of Nairobi in Kenya and the University of Bergen in Norway. Dr. Ogwell, we welcome you to provide your keynote address. Please go ahead. I think we're having some technical challenges. Dr. Ogwell, I don't see you. Maybe Anna Maria, do you mind if we start with you while Ahmed is trying to probably resolve some connection issues?
No problem.
I'll make your introduction, so I don't want to skip that part. I'll do your introduction first, and then. But thank you for your flexibility, and thanks for our audience. We'll start with our dear friend Anna Maria Henao-Restrepo to do part of the global stage setting perspective for us. Sorry, I have a message. Okay, to speak more slowly, I will try to do that. Anna Maria, our colleague, she is a physician, a communicable disease epidemiologist, and clinical trialist who has made significant contributions to global health through her work in vaccine research and disease prevention. She currently co-leads the WHO's R&D blueprint for action to prevent epidemics. She has coordinated research on priority pathogens that can cause epidemics and coordinated trials and deployment of novel vaccines and therapeutics during outbreaks. One of Anna Maria's most notable achievements in her work on development and the evaluation of VSV, Ebola vaccine, which proved highly effective in protecting against Ebola infection. The vaccine has been instrumental in saving lives in regions affected by the virus. Ana Maria holds a medical doctor and surgeon degree from the University of Rosario, Colombia, and a master's degree in communicable disease epidemiology from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the UK. Ana Maria, you welcome. Please, I would like to welcome you to give your presentation, and thank you again for your flexibility.
Thank you. Can you see my screen correctly, and can you hear me?
We can hear you and see your screen. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you for this introduction. I often get only introduced as Ana Maria, so thank you, Montasser, for being so kind. So I'm going to talk about the work that we are doing with colleagues across WHO, but also with thousands of scientists around the world in the hope this will inspire your deliberations. So the first thing is I always talk about why we do this, because the Constitution of WHO states that one of WHO's key roles is to promote, conduct, and coordinate research in the field of health. And we have this R&D blueprint because the 194 member states unanimously concluded in 2015 that WHO should have a mechanism to ensure that there is access to vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics as fast as possible in the context of outbreaks and epidemics. This goes to the conversation today about building capacity. Dr. Tedros, who happens to be a citizen from the African continent, has repeatedly stated that we cannot make the world safer without investments in science, research, and innovation. And in his words, this investment should be everywhere. Everywhere, of course, includes Africa. So we think that it's very important and critical that today you are discussing how to expand the capacity to produce vaccines in the African continent. As you know, WHO denounced openly the lack of solidarity and the inequity throughout the pandemic. This is why we have several principles that we want to emphasize. You hear a lot about the speed and 100 days and fast access. And sometimes you hear about cost. But we think it's very important that we have also principles regarding quality, equity in availability, and trust in the product safety and efficacy. This is why I'm organizing work where the people who are going to be the beneficiaries of the vaccines are closer to the production, and the data emerges from the populations will certainly contribute to these principles. So I thought my story about Africa is very pertinent, and I call this sometimes dreams become reality. As Montasser said, I have the responsibility and the role to work on the Ebola vaccine trials during the terrible epidemic in 2014 and 16. This is the picture of a girl in Liberia celebrating the day that the preliminary results of the vaccine were published. And it makes my heart warm every time I see this picture. And why it makes my heart warm? First, because thanks to the donation of the Canadian government to WHO of several thousand doses that facilitated the accelerated access to the doses so trials can be conducted. And thanks to the collaborative effort that WHO started as soon as the public health emergency of international concern was declared, we were able for the first time to shorten the time period between the declaration of the fake and the preliminary results of the SASOFI trial from years to just 1 year. And that was remarkable and only possible due to international collaboration. The other thing that is very important is that before that, but particularly in this example, we were convinced that the countries, the affected countries, the countries at risk, should be in the driving seat as part of a global collaboration, but in the driving seat. So I just want to say that without the support of the government of Guinea, in particular Dr. Keita Sakoba, the national coordinator of the Ebola response, and the young researchers from Guinea that I call the Dream Team, we would not have been able to conduct this trial in record time under the conditions of the outbreak. Not only they produced high quality data that led to identify the efficacy of this vaccine, but also they demonstrated that even in a country like Guinea with limited resources, high quality research could be done. They move on, and now since then, they move on to DRC and train around 250 healthcare workers and researchers in DRC who were able to deploy the BSV CVOV-GP vaccine before it was licensed in the 12 outbreaks that occurred since 2016. During these outbreaks, 350,000 people, including 100,000 healthcare workers in the areas of the outbreak, were vaccinated with informed consent and with individual data collection that helped to further document the efficacy of this vaccine. So I always say that this is an example of research and trials of Africans for Africans, and I am happy to have the privilege to work with them. Since 2016, as I said, all the outbreaks have been responded with vaccination within 1 week to 2 weeks. When we move into Sudan, for which there is no vaccine, the team in Uganda, under the leadership of the Ministry of Health there, was able to prepare for the outbreak from protocol, training, etc., getting the approvals from the local national regulatory authority and the ethics review committee in less than 60 days. The shortcoming there was the availability of doses that could be tested in the trial. Luckily, and thanks to the good work of the field workers, the outbreak was stopped using normal countermeasures, but prove that once more it is possible to conduct research in the context of outbreaks, to do it fast and to do it of high quality. So now we are sitting today at the bridge of two important opportunities. The first opportunity is the negotiations on the global pandemic treaty or tool or instrument or agreement that will allow all of us to be hopefully better prepared for the future. It includes research and development articles, article number 9, and we hope the countries in their wisdom ensure that this article leads to building capacity at the country levels. And I want to say, sometimes people say building capacity in the low and middle income countries, but during COVID we saw many trials done in the north who were not informative. And the second opportunity is a change in strategy at WHO. Instead of looking at individual pathogens like we did since 2016, now we are using a viral family and bacterial approach that hopefully will reduce the uncertainties that we have about who is the next pathogen that will cause an outbreak or a pandemic, and also how can we prepare using prototype candidate vaccines and prototype monoclonal antibodies. And so this is just a slide to say thank you to the 300 global experts who have been working with us for the last year, reviewing the evidence of hundreds of viruses and bacteria, and working in 25 groups. That's included looking at the pathogen X, and we hope to finalize this process by early 2024, when we are going to have 3 groups. One is the pathogens that were not reviewed because the evidence doesn't allow to say they were a risk. The pathogens that are expert review seems to have less potential of causing pandemics and fakes. And then pathogens that after expert review seem to have a high potential or definitely are considered threats in the future. We haven't been working on this since the beginning, so here is just a quick overview of what we have done to develop roadmaps and target product profiles and monitoring of the pipeline of vaccines and therapeutics when we will focus on pathogen specific things. But as I say, we are not doing this anymore. We are moving into viral families and bacterial families. I will skip this one. So then going back with my team of the country-centered approach that is transparent, objective, and collaborative, that I think this is what CDC Africa is also promoting. Here is a picture of today of the Tokomesa trial team at the Makerere University. In Uganda, they are preparing to conduct phase 2, phase 3 studies as part of the support that we have from the government of Canada to do that. So it is possible, the capacity exists, and the researchers are very keen to serve their communities and societies, even in the absence of an outbreak. So we are very enthusiastic about continuing our collaboration with the researchers in Uganda and in the other 19 countries at risk of filovirus outbreaks. So in summary, we want to work with the countries in the driving seat. We want to provide all the tools that could help the landscape of candidate vaccines, the target profiles. We think it's important that we have a WHO independent process for the prioritization of the products that should be tested in the different outbreaks, because everybody will think that the product they are investing is the best one, and sometimes it doesn't work that way. And we are working with the national authorities, and the first is a workshop we are going to do in Africa with the 25 virus at-risk countries to discuss and get pre-approval of the core protocols and discuss all the regulatory and insurance framework and all the needs to support of local research capacity to ensure for the next outbreak of filovirus we are all ready and the countries know exactly who is going to do the research on their behalf in each country. I am going to skip this, but just to say that research is a continuum. So we work during the interepidemic period, we work as part of the outbreak, integrated with the outbreak response, and we work to have enabling research activities that will help us ensure that the research is possible, like regulatory issues, ethical issues, community engagement, infodemics, etc. And then before I leave you, I just want to remind all of you that WHO is very engaged in increasing the capacity to produce vaccines in the South, particularly in this case in Africa. I'm just quoting how Dr. Tedros was immensely proud early this year of the achievement of all the people involved in the messenger RNA hub in South Africa, because it shows that in less than 2 years, immense progress was done. And this messenger RNA technology transfer program is at the heart of our commitment in WHO. So to finalize, maximizing our research efforts to inform strategic actions is critical. The systematic approach that is collaborative is important, and we hope there is no fragmentation in our efforts to improve local capabilities, and innovative approaches and emerging technologies can help in selecting among the available vaccine candidates for prototype pathogens. Thank you very much. Hello?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Anna Maria. Sorry, just the clicking is takes a moment there. Thank you so much, Anna Maria, for setting the stage for us. You have talked about the importance of having a coordinated approach to vaccine production, vaccine development and production, and the new approach, or a kind of a good practice approach of focusing on families of pathogens and prototypes of vaccines, and how hopefully this will be accelerating progress or the response time for developing new vaccines for outbreaks and health emergencies. Also, just emphasizing the importance of the work that needs to happen during the inter-pandemic periods. We were caught, a lot of us were caught off guard by COVID-19, and just sort of emphasizing the lessons learned, your emphasis on the lessons learned from that to really be better prepared in the inter-pandemic periods is just so important and so timely. Dr. Ahmed is still having some technology challenges to join us, so hopefully he'll be able to join us later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to proceed right away with the panel segment of this webinar, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions for Anna Maria on the basis of her very comprehensive presentation. So we have 4 panelists today who will be speaking to us, and I'll just ask the panelists to put their cameras on while I'm introducing them. I'm going to mention their names first, and then I'm going to do a quick bio on each, and then I'm going to be asking them 2 rounds of questions. So if that's okay, then I will proceed right away. We have with us today Professor John Ataguba, who's the Executive Director of the African Health Economics and Policy Association. We have Professor Petro Terblanche, Chief Executive Officer of Afrigen. And then we have Dr. Morena Makhoana, Chief Executive Officer for Biovac. And then we have Dr. Solomon Zewdu, who is the Senior Executive President of Mastercard Foundation. I'm going to do I think I'm speaking too fast. I'm going to do a quick summary of bio of each of our panelists today to recognizing their contribution into this field, and then to set the stage for their responses to my questions. Professor John Ataguba is the Executive Director of African Health Economics Policy Association based in Accra, Ghana. He is currently a member of the Board of Directors for the International Health Economics Association, a fellow for the Pan-African Scientific Research Council, and a research fellow for the Partnership for Economic Policy Network. Professor Ataguba has also recently been appointed the inaugural Canada Research Chair in Health Economics at the University of Manitoba. He is currently the PI for an IDRC-supported research project entitled Equitable Access to COVID-19 Vaccines in Africa, ECOVA. Next, we have Professor Petro Terblanche, who holds the position of Chief Executive Officer of Afrigen Biologics Limited, based in Cape Town, South Africa. A considerable part of her career was in research, development, and innovation at the South African Medical Research Council, as well as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. She has held and holding several strategic public and private sector board positions in South Africa, as well as the position of President of the Stakeholders Organization for the Global Alliance for TB Drug Discovery and Development from 2007 to 2010. Next, we have Dr. Morena Makhoana, who joined the Biovac in 2004 and holds the role of Chief Executive Officer. He's a member of the board and the Biovac executive team. Prior to his CEO role at Biovac, he held the role of Deputy CEO, and prior to that, of Medical Affairs Director for Biovac. During his tenure, Biovac has attracted 3 successful technology transfers with global pharmaceutical companies such as Sanofi and Pfizer that has allowed the company to grow its staff complement from 24 to over 400. And then next we have Dr. Solomon Zewdu, who is the Senior Executive Resident for Strategy, Planning, and Programming at the Mastercard Foundation. He has been the Relationship Manager for Africa CDC since the establishment of the agency, and continues to help shape investments in vaccine, therapeutics, and diagnostics, manufacturing, and pandemic preparedness and response, and the new public health order in Africa. Prior to joining the Mastercard Foundation, Dr. Zewdu spent 7 years as a Deputy Director at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Africa, where he shaped continental health, nutrition, disease eradication, and development investments. So this is a brief summary of the bio of our panelists today. But without further ado, I'm going to jump right into the first question, and I'm going to direct my first question to John. John, what do you think are the regulatory and policy barriers to scaling vaccine manufacturing in Africa today? And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Montasser, for the very generous introduction. And welcome to all our guests and people who have tuned in. The question you asked is a very important question in terms of regulatory and policy barriers that militate against scaling up vaccine manufacturing on the continent, on the African continent. I would first like to start by highlighting the issue of fragmented and weak regulatory frameworks for vaccine manufacturing on the African continent. But what we've seen recently is the establishment of AMA. AMA is the African Medicines Agency. is a way to now begin to harmonize the regulatory process on the continent such that we can improve vaccine production as well as access. And AfHEA in its own right aims to provide overall leadership in this area to ensure that there's harmonization of regulatory frameworks. The only challenge again is how to also strengthen, not just harmonize, but also strengthen. Progress has been slow. For example, we have Africa CDC. I hope we'll have a chance to hear Dr. Ahmed Ogwell talk. The Africa CDC also established regulatory work stream for regulatory capacity, in other words, to oversee vaccine production on the African continent, to expand production and manufacturing capabilities and capacities. Another big challenge is political and financial commitments needed for vaccine production is challenging on the African continent. We heard this coming out from the last presentation by Anna Maria. There is weak investment in R&D on the continent, and that speaks a lot to income of the countries. So scaling up vaccine production will be very challenging. And this is so sad that even up to 2023 that we are, Africa still has limited vaccine manufacturing. Most of the vaccine consumed or used on the African continent are imported. It's a big challenge. And also unfavorable market conditions for vaccines produced on the continent. This is not just limited to local consumption, but also international markets. We saw that with the COVID-19 outbreak. Our vaccines cannot be accepted internationally. So in as much as we still try to ramp up production, how do local international markets see our vaccines? Are they acceptable? And also the existing international arrangements like the TRIPS agreements that they're supply side barriers to accessing vaccine on the African continent. And as such, there are a whole lot of challenges in terms of having a vaccine that is already patented, and need is increasing on the African continent to have either waiver or compulsory licensing on the continent to provide such vaccines. And of course, the whole issue of incoherent policy across different sectors, trade, industry, health, finance. There is no one single sector within government organization where all these things are embedded. So what that means is that in terms of policy making, there might be incoherencies between government agencies. I think I would like to stop here in the interest of time. Thank you, Montasser. Over to you.
Thanks so much, John. You raised really very important, many important points, but the point about policy coherence and the importance of conducive trade policies I think is a point that we're going to come back to during this webinar and future webinars as well. It's a very important one among the many points you raised. Dr. Ahmed Ogwell is now able to join us. Thank you very much for trying to work the magic with the technology to resolve the issues from your end. Really delighted that you're able to join us. So for our audience, what I'm going to propose now is that we just put a pause, we'll pause the panelists, and we'll just go to our keynote speaker, Dr. Ahmed, and then we'll come back to resume our panelists and my questions for them. So without further ado, Dr. Ahmed, please go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Montasser, and I hope you can hear me and see me clearly. I am in rural Equatorial Guinea, and yeah, the internet just decided to go off that we are here. So, so as not to disrupt too much, there are a few things that I'd wanted to share today to set the stage for the good conversation. First is that Africa today manufactures only 1% of the human vaccines that we use on the continent, that we need on the continent. We import 99%. the experiences, let me add the bad experiences we had during the pandemic, taught us a very important lesson that if you don't own the tools of response, then you are widely exposed when it comes to large outbreaks and, God forbid, another pandemic. So whether those tools are diagnostics, whether they are therapeutics, whether they are vaccines or other medical countermeasures that we need, if you don't own them, then you cannot be able to respond effectively. That is why at the beginning of this pandemic in 2020, under the leadership of President Ramaphosa, who was the chair of the African Union at the time, we began the journey of working through what do we need on the continent to be able to be better prepared for the next large outbreak, whether it's on the continent or it is global. One of those clear needs was human vaccines. And we then, as Africa CDC, were tasked with coming up with a plan on how we can have better access to human vaccines. In April of 2021, under the leadership of President Tshisekedi of the DRC, the African Union then gave us the marching orders under the Partnership for Africa Vaccines Manufacturing, that where Africa is at 1% today, we need to move to 60% by 2040. Now, 2040 sounds
Dr. Ogwell, we lost you for a moment. Are you able to see us, hear me? Apology for the technology interruption. We'll just try to get Dr. Ogwell back. Okay, I suggest we go to our my next question to our panelists. Sorry for the back and forth a little bit, where obviously Dr. Ogwell is experiencing some technological challenges, and we can all relate to that, I'm sure. So I'll just go to my next question to Petro, please, and thank you again for your flexibility. Considering your work on mRNA technology, what role can tech transfer play in scaling Africa's vaccine manufacturing capacity presently? Please go ahead, and you have 3 minutes. Go ahead. And thank you.
So thank you very much, and good day to all our participants. And also let me use this opportunity to give recognition and gratitude to the Canadian government for the support they've given to the mRNA program here in South Africa. Africa has a bold vision, and for us to reach the goals of 2040, which is critical for the well-being of the continent, we have to follow multiple pathways and multiple strategies. We cannot only be a greenfields strategy. And therefore, I want to particularly focus in the area of tech transfer on 2 different strategies that I think is absolutely critical for the continent to reach that bold vision. And the first one is the mRNA program as a case study. This is developing technology platforms and products that can be transferred to 5 partners on the continent, particularly mRNA. What this will give us is a platform for multiple products, both therapeutics and also vaccines, and it gives us pandemic preparedness in terms of the specific modalities that mRNA brings: small footprint, versatility, rapid response, a technology platform that leans itself towards pandemic preparedness and epidemic preparedness. So I think that is the one critical area where technology development from a greenfield perspective for the continent, giving access to the continent to a technology platform is critical. The other component that I want to talk about is the importance of partnerships, the importance of the continent to reach that goal, to have technology partnerships. And maybe to demonstrate the opportunity is for us to look at the current global product development pipeline. And this is public domain information that we can find in GFinder, but it's also WHO playing a critically important role, not only in the mRNA program, as mentioned earlier by Anna Maria, in terms of that pandemic preparedness and inter-pandemic sustainability, but in the pipeline development. If we do a rough analysis and we look at the goals for 2040, and we look at which of the products are currently in pipeline development that is aligned with Africa priority diseases, the 22 priority diseases that the Africa CDC has set out as a target for the continent to prioritize for manufacturing. And when Dr. Ogwell comes online, he will certainly outline that. If you look at that analysis, we found that 8 of those 22 products are in development and should reach registration by 2040. That is 71% of the target in terms of the number of pathogens, priority pathogens on the continent. It is imperative for us to set up the partnerships early on the continent to be able to access the manufacturing technologies for those products. Those are the products that will enable us to reach our target of 60%. In addition to this, I think we should recognize the work of Biovac in tech transfer from Janssen's, from Aspen for Janssen's, and now for Serum Institute, and for Biovac, Sanofi, Pfizer, and also now Biologics. The importance of existing entities, operational and meeting all the requirements for quality vaccine supply, to enter into technology transfer arrangements and agreements that allows us to get access to technology platforms. I think it is critical if we look at the ecosystem that the PAVM has built in Africa CDC for the strategy for Africa to reach our goals. One of the critical components in that ecosystem is technology transfer. And again, the reasons being that we cannot go greenfield. So we have to fast track, we have to leverage that exists globally and bring that in partnerships into the continent. And I know there are many discussions and many enabling discussions happening for us to access that. But for us, let's partner and get access to those priority product transfers to be able to transfer technology for the continent to reach our bold vision. I think that's the comments I want to share for this one. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Petro. Being bold is really what Africa and what everyone needs to be and to do. You've spoken to many points that are very dear to us here at IDRC. Access to technology, not just access to the vaccines themselves or products, it's access to the actual know-how. With some of it is coming from Africa, but also access to the global sort of market for technology, so to speak, and the importance of partnerships for the delivery of that, or for the cooperation on that front. Also, the importance of building on the readiness of existing entities in the continent to be able to adopt and scale up and take up this challenge and this bold goal. So thanks so much for raising these very important points. I'm going to move right on to our next panelist, and I'm going to go to Morena, please. If you could please tell us what business models are needed to enable the scaling of vaccine manufacturing in Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And really also like to echo what Petro was saying, firstly by being invited, but also by the support that I think as a collective on the continent. We've received from the Canadian government, from the likes of Mastercard Foundation, and the continuous coordination that Africa CDC continues to have, and the leadership that they provide. I think the question about business models, I think Petro has really touched on some of that very distinctly. So there is no one model of building capability, particularly on a continent that is really starting from scratch. You know, I think Ahmed described how we are 1% manufacturing continent at the moment, and we still have a long way to go. So the question is, how do you get towards the vision of 60%? Now, it can't be one size fits all. And therefore, we do need companies that would be looking at the upstream element. As an example, if we take Petro and Afrigen, who are really looking at the upstream, looking at the latest technology, can get their teeth into really, really difficult science in an environment that is very, very challenging. And then companies like ours that are looking more to the downstream and making sure that we also make sure that the downstream is quite fertile. And as we go in opposite directions, which is more complementary than even competitive, where companies like us as Biovac that have been looking more towards the downstream, try and go up the upstream, because the continent needs drug substance capability. Whilst on the other hand, you take the research projects that also need to go now towards the downstream. In that way, there will be complementarity, because then others that are more upstream will be learning towards the downstream, whilst ones that are more downstream will be going towards the upstream. Again, understanding, and I think I'm probably talking to the converted here, that there are many technology platforms. So it's not like vaccines can be manufactured only out of one platform. So many platforms that need to be explored and exhausted, the latest technologies, but also the traditional technologies. But I also maybe want to take this opportunity just to take a step back, particularly for our audience, and just remind that as we talk here, that, I mean, it's probably about 2 years, I think it is about 2.5 years, that the likes of the PAVM has been established. At the time, it was just thought that, oh, our politicians are just, you know, African politicians are just making a noise and what's going to happen. But you can see that already a lot of achievement have been done in 2 years. So the execution, we're actually living right in the execution. We have active projects that are there. And I'd also like to just emphasize on the ecosystem that Petro emphasized on. So she spoke about technology transfers and partnerships, which is key and important. I think John spoke about policy and the regulatory space, which is also very important. We need infrastructure that can also absorb that. Now, that infrastructure needs funding. Around the infrastructure, then we have human capability that I also like to expand on, which is far most important, because buildings don't come up on their own. Technology doesn't make itself. Everything centers around the people and the human capability that is needed. The regulatory space has also been touched upon. The supply chain is quite important in terms of getting input material at an affordable price and when it's accessible. And the last part, which is important, is about the market. Because unless there's a market, then this initiative of reviving vaccine manufacturing on the continent won't be there. So with just these 6 or 7 points that I've outlined, it's really just to show that the ecosystem needs to exist, and that all of these elements that we've described and are continuously describing, can't live in silos. And that there's a lot of effort that's been done on the execution side. You know, we have projects like the mRNA Hub project as an example. We have other projects that are trying to do drug product manufacture. But also there's a lot of work that the Africa CDC, together with the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, have done in trying to shape the market. Now, part of maybe some of your participants may or may not be aware, but there's an active discussion with Gavi, who are funding vaccines, about what is called an African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator. This is to look at the market to make sure that Africa catches up. Because if the level field is similar to those that have been established in the past 50 or 60 years, Africa won't get to that point. And therefore, part of the critical element within the business model is the market. And so we really need the market to make sure that it prioritizes African vaccine manufacturing, and not to the disadvantage of others, but to ensure that African manufacturer does a catch-up. Now, like any catch-up campaign, you can't do it in a normal setting. You have to incentivize African vaccine manufacturing, and so that market piece is important. So I'm going to pause here, but essentially, I mean, my main message is that there are different models in terms of building capability on the continent, and we need to support all of them, but also the ecosystem is important. And then lastly, that there is action being taken on the ground since 2 years ago, and that action we really like for it to be supported. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Morena. Very important points as well. I won't repeat them, of course, but really the emphasis on the market, the emphasis on accelerating the market preparedness as well as a key ingredient of the whole goal, and the importance of research both for upstream and downstream. These are really important points. And what you also said kind of raises for me the point of, like, you know, how can we break the silos, but how can we also not be competitors, but actually collaborators where and when possible for the bigger goal for Africa. I think really very, very important points. I'm going to move now to Solomon. We're continuing to experience some difficulties with Dr. Ahmed, and we're trying to get him to get a recorded message from him. Hopefully that will work to share it with the participants now. Solomon, please, from a funder's perspective, what needs to be done to strengthen domestic capacity for vaccine manufacturing in Africa, in your view?
So, thanks, Montasser. And I think that I'll be even briefer, because my good colleague Morena has kind of touched upon one of the pain points that we particularly experience. It's a pain point in the sense that we'd like to catch up with the narrative around market, because we're not at the space we were 2 years ago before the pandemic. A fair amount of capacity has been built, in addition to the existing capacities. The capacities in Dr. Morena's outfit or Petro's outfit have been strengthened to handle even more demand. But if we were to look at the greatest incentive, and I think Morena talked about that a bit, for any manufacturer is making sure that their product is not going to sit on the shelf. And we know that demand is not necessarily driven by the disease burden or the importance of a particular intervention. All over the world, we have great technologies and great discoveries that sit on shelves because the market does not exist for it. So the end point here for vaccine manufacturing on the continent is seldom confused with the fact that it is making vaccines. Africa is not new to making vaccines. In fact, you can go back 60 years in some institutions where they've been manufacturing human vaccines or animal vaccines, but it has never picked up. And it doesn't pick up because of the lack of traction. So what I would like to really emphasize here, either from the donor side or even from just an concerned African, is the fact that as part of this ecosystem that's been mentioned by all of my colleagues, the end point of this is being able to get your product to the individuals that require it, and really use those life-saving commodities in the way they was intended. They need to be in children's arms. To this point, as far as we know, that we've known that measles and rubella is an important vaccine, life-saving vaccine, and yet we have a tremendous load of zero-dose babies all over the continent. So there is a mismatch in that incentivizing and the narrative around making sure that Africa could start contributing to the vaccine need or burden of the globe. But there's also an opportunity here that we need to really look into when it comes to making sure that African nations also step into that space and come together to really make sure that those vaccines that are produced in Africa are primarily incentivized by African nations. And under the PAVM or Africa CDC, that narrative has already started. I don't think, personally, that it's robust enough. We really need to start thinking about volume guarantees as an incentive to our manufacturer colleagues that run multi-million-dollar outfits here as CEOs and other colleagues to really make sure that we are positioning them for success. Throughout the development world and the development space, we've built many white elephants, and they get picked up due to a crisis. They get picked up due to a policy that was just passed, a unified approach, a global approach, and then they're left hanging with millions, hundreds of millions of investments into them, not really meeting their mark. So our impact here, as we look forward, and the whole ecosystem should really be around what's the end point. And the end point is not vaccine manufacturing. The end point is manufacturing it and putting it into children's arms or mother's arms or any other life-saving commodity that is supposed to be in the community. So vaccine, we've heard over COVID that vaccine access is not vaccination. You know, we can increase the access to vaccines with local manufacturers, but as long as we don't pick up that product, we're basically dooming these manufacturer colleagues that we have on the call. And I don't want to be dismal or anything like that, and it's not something that they don't know already. But I wanted to really re-emphasize here Morena's last point and making sure that, you know, it is a true incentive. If we were to change the paradigm and say, if African nations coming together, if Gavi were to come forward and say, here's a volume guarantee for X product, of course, not undermining the quality or the price point, that this institution or this coming together, this coalition, will put a volume guarantee in a sourcing 30% of this product, if it's global product in Africa, the entire ecosystem will change. So again, re-emphasizing, and I'll stop here, to make sure that we really look at the downstream of this, where vaccines actually are purchased, not just produced. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Solomon. This is, of course, very important points. The role of incentives or incentivizing the uptake of the vaccines, not just about the end line is not the manufacturing, it's the end line is actually having those vaccines in arms or mouths or in bodies, and the role of governments and the role of global financing partners is very key to this, and it's really important. And maybe I'll just add to your point, Solomon, just to build on your point, and it's not just again reaching the the children or populations with the vaccines, but it's the continued incentive or continued readiness for production, future production. It's not a one-off. It's not one round of vaccines. It's hopefully building the the whole ecosystem, not just for for the next 2 years, but building the ecosystem for the long-term future, so we don't have white elephant kind of mistakes, as you mentioned. Thanks so much for this. I'm going to just go right into the next round. We're slightly over time, but I'm going to go right to the next round for our panelists. I'm sure everyone wants to hear a little bit more from everyone. Anna Maria, were you trying to say something? Sorry, I may have missed something.
Yes, I just wanted to expand a little bit about this idea of the vaccination and etc. And there are, of course, I am very much for capacity in the South, being a person from the South myself. But I just want to say that the points made are very important, because in the enthusiasm to produce, if there is not a sustainable approach to the access to the vaccines, and to the use of the vaccines, then it becomes, and I remember when my previous boss, Dr. Mary Paul Kinney, worked with support from the US government in building capacity for influenza vaccines. You remember that there were 6 sites around the world, etc. They succeeded in producing the vaccines, but then they die off all around the world because there was no demand. So this is one very important point. And the second point I want to say is that if you produce vaccines, and I was a measles focal point, like measles, it is very difficult to compete because the Serum Institute of India basically can produce the entire of the global supply in 3 months for a few cents. So you have to choose really which vaccines you are going to produce that are competitive. And the third one is about the governments. We have a collaboration with Johnson & Johnson for the Ebola vaccine, Adeno 26 MVA, and we went to 6 African countries that have outbreaks and offered them to vaccinate the healthcare workers and frontline workers for free, including the operational costs. We were supposed to be honest here. And only 2 countries say, okay, we want to do it. And those who know me know that I'm very pushy, so I really try, minister down, to convince them to vaccinate these healthcare workers and frontline workers, but because there was no outbreak, they didn't feel that was the top priority for them. And then finally, I just want to say that one key theme for these regulatory conversations is the simple fact of getting the ability of the regulatory teams to give no objections to clinical trials. It is a pain as it is for regulatory authorities and for ethics, and I may become get additional enemies by saying this, but the truth is it takes a lot of time, even in the context of outbreaks. Many of the comments we receive are really dismal, that you think, wow, they took all this time to make these comments. So if you want to be a vaccine production continent, I think I will start by ensuring that these regulatory authorities are familiar and have a good process for no objections for clinical trials, because otherwise, imagine how the authorization of vaccines is basically the next step after authorizing trials. So I just wanted to really insist that. And about the zero-dose children, it's really terrible. Why and how this happens still today, why people die of measles. It's really not possible, not acceptable. Seeing more people die of measles in the African continent, more children, than they die of COVID. So that's really, and for the other preventable diseases. So this is really important.
Thanks so much, Anna Maria. You saved me from trying to sum up the first round. So this is really a fantastic sort of highlighting of the main points that came from the first round. And I'll just add to one thing to what Anna Maria said, with about the urgency of this for all levels, for all the partners, including under the leadership of governments and the buy-in of governments. Is the point of, like, if we don't know how many children we have, if we don't know how many the countries have, what populations they have, if not just plug in for civil registration and vital statistics. If we don't have this information on how many of populations we have in a country or in any country, how possible it is to assess the demand, to assess the market for a vaccine or for any medical or therapeutic product. So anyway, just a plug-in for having good numbers as a key ingredient of planning for development activities, but including for assessing the vaccine market and uptake. I'm going to go right into the next round, and I'm going to start with you, John, again, if you don't mind. And I'm going to ask you, how is your research helping to address these barriers, and what other research opportunities come to mind?
Thank you so much, Montasser, and thanks to colleagues. I kind of picked up a couple of things as everyone was presenting. In terms of our research, which you eloquently described earlier, we're working on equitable access to vaccines in Africa, which is a collaborative effort between AfHEA, which is African Health Economics and Policy Association, and Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. In terms of how our research will help to address the barriers, which is a key question you asked, it's a very difficult one to answer directly. We have to also bear in mind that researchers work in an environment that sometimes it can be constrained in terms of moving quickly from research to changing policy. However, one of the major things that we are currently doing in that regard is to bring many of these issues that I've raised to the fore. We've had webinars where we invite high-level persons to talk on issues while we also present findings in terms of the barriers, regulatory barriers, policy issues, and all the factors that affect vaccine access on the African continent. There's one that is important to note, which kind of came out again, is the issue of human behavior. I will talk about that maybe when I address the second part of your question, which you talked about pretty much what research opportunities this also create. Then another thing that we're doing again is to do more in-depth analysis within countries. So we're going to countries in all the 5 African regions: North, East, West, South, and Central. I got them all right completely. So we want to understand many of these issues in depth. For example, what are the barriers to vaccine production in East, Northwest, all the regions of Africa, and how, from a very social science perspective. I think it's something I want to highlight, that these social science perspectives have kind of been lost in the whole discussion many times. We fail to realize that even provision of vaccine, people have to take them up. Anna Maria raised something about going out to provide something free and people don't take them up. We just assume that so long as something is available there, everyone is free, you should take it up. And that's where social scientists come to play. We need to understand why people behave the way they behave. It's not just hardcore science. If you add 1 to 1 is 2, but you go to the field, you add 1 to 1, you get 0. You don't even get 1. So these are things that social scientists have serious understanding of how to navigate that. And that brings me to trying to quickly talk about research opportunities, is to leverage on the complementarity of all our collaborators to see how we can now take this further beyond just research output, but trying to influence policies at a national level, regional level, and possibly global level. And the research area that is heavily neglected is the global political economy of vaccine access. It's a very important part. Global political economy of vaccine access. Why is it that when diseases affect, for example, the global north, response rate is different from diseases that affect global south, and why then is it that when the disease affects everyone, both north and south, the southern part of the global south takes backseat and stuff like that? What are the political economy issues there? And then the last part I want to talk about in terms of research opportunities is for us to begin to think of social science research on human behavior, organizational behavior, and behavior of agents, all the agents, whether it's in persons, it is firms, it has to do with producers of vaccine, regulators, government, or what are the factors that motivate the behaviors that they all put up. There's been serious overemphasis on technicalities, technical research. You hear a lot of people talking about vaccine production in terms of the pharmaceuticals, in terms of the science of it, R&D, which are very critical. But you cannot get research and development output to people when you don't know the link between that output and how to get it to the people you need. And that's where I think we need to begin to think seriously about social science research. I think with that, I would hand over the mic to you, Montasser. Thanks.
Thanks so much, John. You've laid the kind of the first floor of the research agenda that needs to accompany the ambitious goals of vaccine manufacturing in Africa and frankly everywhere else. But this is really a great start. I'm going now to go to Petro with my next question. Which is what are some knowledge and research capacity opportunities and gaps regarding tech transfer of vaccines?
Thank you. If I may, maybe circle back to what Anna Maria is saying and many of the comments of all of us. We must be careful not to despair I think there's a great realism on the continent that for the ecosystem to be resilient, we have to have the energy and the leadership to continue to implement. The strategy is good, so if I may make this comment, it's going to take a whole village to make it happen. But just because it's difficult, it's not a reason to really give everything we can. So I want to comment a little bit on the innovation space, because part of tech transfer is embedded in innovation space. And I want to circle to what Solomon said earlier in terms of what brings sustainability, what brings long-term sustainability. It is about health equity, and it is about access to technology, but it's actually industrial initiative. And those policies integrated will bring the sustainability. So from a tech transfer perspective, I think where we can make really great contributions is in innovate to ensure that the sustainability for what we build on the continent is addressed. For example, cost of goods. We already in many areas look at how do we ensure that the tech transfer for either product or technologies to the continent is focusing on affordability of vaccines as a one means. The second one is thermostability, delivery systems. The point that John made around social behavioral issues. Do we understand vaccine hesitancy? Do we understand what drives those behaviors? I think even there is social innovation that we need to attend to. And I want to make a plea for the R&D landscape, because tech transfer cannot happen without research and development. It is developing something that is a product that can be shared. And I've put in a plea previously and before, and I'm glad that there's some participants here that I could do it again. For us on the continent to foster the biotech startups. Look at the biotech startups. 30% of their expenditure or their cost or their budgets are devoted to research development and technology development, and create incentives for the private sector, the manufacturers, to also invest in R&D. I think for the continent to build a technology basis for vaccine manufacturing, vaccine innovation, we need all of those components. We have gaps that we need to really carefully look at. We have skills gaps, and we certainly have platform gaps. The mRNA platform is one, and Morena said it earlier. I do believe we have similar initiatives that we need to foster on the continent to look at subunit platforms and other platforms that will bring us the diversity of products that's needed by the continent, but also will bring economic development and socio-economic impact in a sustainable manner. One of the other gaps that we have seen recently is even for greenfields projects is the ability or the willingness for public-private investments. This is high-risk business. And we all realize that if we don't get the market right, and we actually don't have the last mile right, and we don't have government's commitments to procurement, that we will have the white elephants that Solomon talked about earlier. So we need I think as a bottom line, a comment that I want to make is one of the reasons why South Africa could really move quite fast in developing a new technology platform with all the support from WHO and partners was because the government invested in an R&D infrastructure. I think the continent needs more of that. The continent needs to commit to invest in research and development infrastructure that will allow us to develop and to receive products and technologies that can be shared and build the sector. And that, I think that is over to you from my side. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Petro. You built the first and second floor of the research agenda, building on John's earlier comments, with really very interesting and helpful concepts of industrial initiative, social innovation, R&D landscape, public-private partnerships, and of course underlying all of this is really the relationship and the priorities placed by governments to be to be contributors to the ecosystem and the infrastructure. So these are really incredibly important points, and hopefully to build on those, I'm going to move to Morena to ask what are the opportunities for research to catalyze on enabling business environment for vaccine manufacturing in Africa.
Thank you. And I think the question is very opportunistic in terms of, when you look at opportunity in terms of, just like, they say you must never waste a crisis. So I think how we need to look at this initiative amongst all the challenges that we've described and amongst all the things that need to be built, I think if all stakeholders, and not only African, but I'm just saying if all stakeholders that are in this community can look at this as an opportunity. Now, whether you look at it as a commercial opportunity, you look at it as a research opportunity, you look at it as a health outcomes opportunity. I think if we flip our mindset to looking at this problem, but more with our opportunity, I think all of us that are living, during these times will have some legacy. I think in the next 40 to 50 years, we'll look back and say, hey, you know what, I've contributed to the world in this way and that way. And as we've said, that the landscape is quite huge. So I think your question around opportunity, I think it's quite apt and quite big. One of the key areas, and I touched on a little bit, but I touched on very briefly, was around human capital capability. That's something that, because the industry is very young, and whether you're talking about even at a university level or whether you're talking about industry, is that we do have the opportunity to build the capability. Now, it's not going to be easy by any standards. In actual fact, one of the threats that we have is not only about building those capability, but I think as an African continent, one of the risks that we have is actually losing those skills to other continents. And so, I don't mind if staff members in South Africa go from Biovac to Afrigen and all of that. They're part of the local ecosystem, or even if they go to Senegal and this. But if we lose them to other developed markets, which is actually happening at the moment, I think we face quite a big risk. So what we need to do is to make sure that this ecosystem is such that if a scientist is there, that is an African scientist sitting in America, in Europe, can at least have the ability to come back home. I think we know the model in China and India, where a lot of people go to Ivy League schools, but a lot of them go back to India or they go back to China. But that's because there's something that's attractive for them to go back to, and they end up even starting new companies when they go back home. So I think one of the things that we should dream, and we should dream realistically, because I'm one of those. I'm a dreamer myself. Is to have a look at to what opportunities can we look at from a skills perspective for us to nurture the skills, make sure that we attract the skills, and make sure that we have a vibrant biotech sector. I think that's important. And obviously, we started with vaccines. Vaccines are the most difficult, amongst other products. But that's if we can get it right with vaccines, I'm very, very confident that diagnostics, and therapeutics can possibly follow. But thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Morena. I'm taking, among the many things I'm taking from your comment, is that to be bold, you need to be vibrant as well. You need to have a vibrant human resource that is able to build up and sustain and innovate as well on the continent. So this is really extremely important. Solomon, I'm going to now turn to you to please, just in your view, share with us in your view what kinds of research are needed to inform scaling of vaccine manufacturing in Africa.
So thanks. Picking up on the theme of being consistent and chasing after a topic that Anna Marie introduced, I'm going to stick to the same topic. For me, ultimately, it's the market piece, because we're seeing tremendous amount of traction on the continent in being able to capitalize on the interest that's there for vaccine manufacturing. When you introduce the scale component in there, that puts another dimension on it and saying it's not just sales of and absorption of what's being able to be produced, but also doing it at scale. So along those lines, I think that the better prepared approach, while we're really building capacity, whether it's human capital development or whether it's infrastructure and things like that, to really match the rest of the world, it would be really great to have even more insight in the type of sustainable market models that would be able to support this effort, especially in the face of, Anna Maria actually mentioned earlier on, giants like Serum Institute. So it would really be, and then so there's Serum Institute, there's the EU countries, and now even China is catching up as well with bulk production. So how do we really work and build a bridge between these organizations, between these continents? It's not one at the expense of the other one, but there's also a great opportunity here to really also tap into the academic muscle to really start looking at what would be a global sustainable model where everybody, every continent with capacity can contribute to the global burden of vaccines, or that same thing could apply to diagnostics and therapeutics. We talked about vaccines quite extensively right now, but as we know in health, vaccines are, the last or the more distant approach to crisis or pandemics and epidemics. We start with diagnostic, trying to understand it first. Second, therapeutics, we try to treat it, and then we try to eradicate it or control it or immunize against it. So this model, I think, the sustainable model that I'm referring to, can apply for all sorts of ambitions that we have beyond vaccines. And I think Morena mentioned the fact about therapeutics and diagnostics, which is also a market that is underserved still, both on the production side, the consumer side. So really bridging this gap and better understanding, better analytics on, what would be a better future. So when we do, it's not if we're going to be able to manufacture vaccines and scale them on the continent. It's when we do that, what kind of environment are we going to be expected to function into, would be a research question that I would love to have answered. So I'll make it brief, and I'll hand it back to you, Montasser, and thank you. Echoing everything that's been done by our colleagues once again. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Solomon. Very, very important points, and I really appreciate all the panelists' very heartfelt responses to these questions. We have 7 minutes left, so I want to be able to finish on time, because I'm sure everyone's time is very precious. So I'm actually going to go. We have a question from one of the participants that I'm going to read, and I'll just turn to the panelists or to if you would like to take this up before we kind of do a little bit of the wrapping up. And the question is, what can be done to improve Africa's science advisory landscape in response to pandemic and in vaccine production in particular? I'm going to just read it again for our audience as well. What can be done to improve Africa's science advisory landscape in response to pandemics and in vaccine production in particular? The question is from Kenya. So probably have time for just one panelist to maybe just intervene to give some reflections on this question. Petro, go ahead.
Maybe from my side, let me try and give some perspectives. And then I have to apologize. I'm starting 4 o'clock with the second webinar, so I'm going to say something and then greet you all and say thank you very much. I think in terms of, if you do an analysis of Africa, of the continent, and how we collaborate as scientists in not only an advisory, but in a collaborative manner, it is some interesting statistics. We know that about 56% of collaborations done between with African scientists are done with Europe and the US and outside of the continent. Less than 20%, between 20 and 25% of collaborations are between African scientists. I think part of what we need to build on the continent is that we learn to work more with each other, that we learn to collaborate with each other as a science community on the continent. And that's not at the cost of the partnerships we build and the collaborations we build outside of the continent. We need to really create the role models for scientists to enter the field. Universities are our base training. Morena, myself, we recruit from university and we train the GMP and the manufacturing skills at workplace. So that partnership, I think, is also very important for a long, sustainable Africa continent with a knowledge base that can actually support manufacturing of medical products.
Thanks so much, Petro.
And I agree
to your next webinar. And actually, I'm just, again, trying to respect everyone's time. So I'm going to go right to our colleague and our sister organization, inviting Mellissa Hisko, who's the Director for Global Immunization and Health Systems at Global Affairs Canada, to provide some concluding remarks. Mellissa is known to many of you in the panel and in probably in the participants as well. She's previously served as the director of the COVID-19 Global Health Task Force, where she managed Canada's international aid and commitment to investments to combat COVID-19 on a global scale. Mellissa, I'm going to give the floor to you. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to your remarks. We can't hear you, Mellissa. If you could unmute. I know it's tricky, but try. Not yet. No. Maybe if you click on request speaking. Oops, we lost Mellissa. Oh. Mellissa, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you very well now. Please go ahead.
I'm so sorry. A new platform for me. Okay, thanks everyone. I'll be quick because I know that we're very short on time. Au nom d'Affaires mondiales Canada, j'aimerais remercier les collègues et partenaires qui ont pris la parole aujourd'hui. Merci d'avoir partagé vos idées et vos solutions sur l'accélération de la fabrication de vaccins.
For sharing your ideas regarding the production of vaccines in Africa.
That were highlighted in today's conversation to promote local ownership and enable regions to address their own health needs. So it's clear that there are many who are working very diligently to accelerate the pace of regional vaccine production to ultimately bring manufacturing closer to the populations that are in need. I think this is a clear lesson learned that we learned the hard way through some of the inequities of the pandemic. As part of Canada's global initiative for vaccine equity, or what we call CanGive, we're very proud to be top donors to the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub program in South Africa. Having visited Afrigen and Biovac fairly recently in Cape Town, I can say that the work that was being undertaken there was impressive, but also that I think it was illustrative of what we can accomplish and build on in Africa. If you allow me, I would love to share a few points of what really resonated for me in the discussion today. So firstly, really the importance of partnerships, so technology partnerships, to gain access to that know-how that's needed, not just the products, the know-how, as well as gaining access to some of those technology platforms. I also heard that we really need to leverage what already exists on the continent, The continent is not starting from scratch, but it needs to catch up. And so to do this, we can't take a one-size-fits-all model. There needs to be upstream pathways, working in difficult science, I believe Dr. Moreno called it. And then we need other efforts like Biovac that are more focused on the downstream efforts as a complement to each other. Also the importance of harmonizing and strengthening regulatory processes. And new initiatives like the Africa Medicines Agency are important, but I think we also do need to increase coherence across sectors, which I think was a great point that was raised, and it's a challenge that I think we can fairly say plagues all of our governments, including our own. And then lastly, a point that really resonated and stood out for me was the need to incentivize manufacturers and a commitment to buy. So without demand, we know that companies won't be in a position to survive. And so sustainability really is needed here to avoid the white elephants that I think we know can easily pop up. And then lastly, an important point is the need to invest in the research agenda. We need to understand those social behavioral aspects that were referred to, the ones that turn a vaccine into a vaccination. So misinformation and disinformation are things that have great impacts on vaccine uptake. We know this, and so that type of research I think is critically important to ensure sustainability over the longer term. So thank you for all the panelists for sharing your insights today. I'll stop there. I know we're over time. I think the variety of perspectives that we heard today is really critical to find effective and inclusive way forwards. For our part, I think we'll continue with our Can Give program, with our support for the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub. We also work closely with Gavi and trying to enhance their market shaping role that they can play in increasing sustainable manufacturing. And then of course in the INB negotiations as well to ensure that these efforts are well integrated. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to having many more conversations on this topic going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mellissa, and thank you very much to all our speakers and panelists and everyone, all the participants. I invite all the participants to keep an eye out for our second roundtable of this series. Entitled Provisionally Strengthening Distribution and Supply Chain Logistics for and Accelerating the Uptake and Use of Vaccines in Africa and Where Research Can Help. Kind of just picking up from the manufacturing side to the uptake side, and we're planning this for December, January, in a couple of months from now. The roundtable will help shape and inform a short paper that summarizes the main conclusions and lay out the potential research agendas for the series. And the public-facing meeting report and recordings for each of those sessions will be in the series, will also be produced and disseminated widely. Thank you so much for tuning in and registering to being part of this roundtable, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. And thank you for staying extra couple of minutes beyond the time. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day and good luck, and be bold. Go out and be bold. Good luck to you. Thanks so much, everyone. Goodbye.